Alright. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rewind, the official podcast of the History Society of St. Stephen's College. Conceived as a platform for dialogue, Rewind brings scholars into conversation with the wider community, fostering thoughtful engagement with the past and its continuing relevance. Each episode invites reflection, discussion, and a deeper understanding of history beyond the classroom.
On this episode of Rewind, we are honored to have with us Professor Ranabir Chakravarti, a distinguished historian specializing in the socio-economic history of early India, with enduring interests in the maritime history of the pre-modern Indian Ocean. Over the course of his career, he has held academic positions at Vishwabharati University, the University of Burdwan, the University of Calcutta, and Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Chakraborty's major monographs include Trade and Traders in Early Indian Society, Exploring Early India up to circa AD 1300, and The Pull Towards the Coast and Other Essays, The Indian Ocean History and the Subcontinent before 1500 CE. He has also edited and co-edited several important volumes such as Trade in Early India, History of Bangladesh, Early Bengal and Regional Perspectives up to circa 1200 CE, and the forthcoming The Coveted Mount, The Horse in South Asian History. He served as president of the Ancient India section at the Indian History Congress's Patiala session in 2011 and was awarded the Professor Hemchandra Rai Chaudhary Birth Centenary Gold Medal by the Asiatic Society Kolkata in 2019. Professor, we are delighted to have you with us. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Professor. We're so grateful to have you here. And for our first question, we wanted to begin with something you've written about extensively, which is maritime history. How do you think histories of the land and the sea move away from and intermingle with each other? For Brodel, conceptualize the Mediterranean as a coherent historical unit shaped by the longue durée forces of geography and exchange. Can the Indian Ocean be understood in similar terms? Does maritime history enable us to move beyond the artificial boundaries of land based political units and better grasp the interconnected, globalized ethos of historical processes? In this context, do you see value in studying the movement of specific commodities, as you have done in the cases of camphor or Gangetic nard, to illuminate these braided connections? Finally, Sanjay Subramaniam has argued for a more discourse oriented approach to connected histories. What, in your view, are the merits of retaining a material anchor in such studies?
Thank you very much. First, the there is a simple, almost compulsive reason of looking at the maritime space, not only around the subcontinent, but on a global scale. After all, the two-thirds of the space of this planet is covered by the sea and the oceans. The land relatively is a minor or a smaller entity, a geographical entity in terms of the character of this planet. So we have to take into account the sea around us. The land, I'm not at all downgrading the importance of the sea, of the land, but the sea is being seen for a long time as a major guiding factor in historical experiences. That there are several ways of looking at the sea. There is also a changing understanding of the sea as an important figure in historical studies. Yes, once upon a time, long time back, maybe 19th century, by maritime history, people used to take into account naval diplomacy, naval engagements, and the naval domination, particularly in the context of the Atlantic, Mediterranean, to some extent Pacific. But that began to change, particularly with the coming of the fascinating work of Fernand Braudel, the Mediterranean and the Mediterranean society in the age of Philip II. And on that basis, he considered the Mediterranean as an arena with which the lives of the people can be demonstrated as an inseparable element. The sea, when we talk about the history of the sea, neither the history, the land, nor the sea may not have its own history, except for the fact that there may be a geological evolution of both the territorial space and also the maritime space. But one, once we speak of history, it brings in human beings. And then the, the life of the people that is impacted by the sea is the most visible and important aspect of maritime history. Now, with this, Brodel pointed out in terms of the Mediterranean for his fascinating, illuminating study that maritime history, once again, is not merely the history of a vast water body, the sea or the ocean. The inseparability of the maritime space with the land mass is writ large in Brodelian exercise, particularly of the Mediterranean. The famous metaphor used, the, the land and the sea are as inseparable as the hand of the potter and the clay with which the potter makes the pot. So that is the integration actually between the land and the sea, particularly the coastal areas. Now, with this also comes a question: what does the coast means? Is it the coast essentially the thin line of the tract washed by the sea or the ocean, or the connectivity of the sea and the land are also captured by the inland connectivity of the coast, particularly through rivers, through sea inlets, through the broken coastline, something like the backwaters of Kerala. Sometimes these are very broad, close to its confluence with the sea, but these are not exactly on the sea. But these are absolutely crucial to understand the linkage between the sea and terrestrial, the territorial landscape. Now, with this, the major change, Brodel and also later, there are various other scholars, and it is also true that Brodel has been critiqued in later times on some methodological issues. But Brodel pointed out the inseparability between the terrestrial and the maritime space. That is a very crucial point. The other point, as Brodel in his Mediterranean suggested, the importance of three layers or three levels of time. As sitting on the coast of Algeria, he said that it was much easier for him to understand France when he was writing the identity of France, because it gives the perspective from a little bit away from the sea to the land. And then he pointed out that this particular particular perspective gave him first close to the coast at fairly dark in the night. There are waves after waves after waves with their the frothy whitish top of the waves, the breakers close to the coast, maximum activity, with perhaps also not much of an impacting nature of those activities. Slightly away, 20, 25 miles away from the coast, where the sea is a little bit deeper, there is not much that kind of furious and fury of the waves there, much calmer. And there, perhaps deeper down, the water level at close to the coast is relatively shallow. As one goes into away from the coast and into the sea, the actually open sea, then the, the depth goes deeper, and perhaps the waves are less uh, active, relatively calm maritime space, but perhaps deep at the at the bottom of the sea, very slowly some interesting uh, natural changes could have come, like the creation of a coral reef. Maybe it's taking 300 years, 500 years. But with the emergence of a coral reef, there could be a difference in navigation process. There could be the a different way of negotiating the sea, and then so the maximum changes at the near the coast, but not impacting to a great degree the human life. A little bit away, the changes are slow, and that he said that this is conjuncture. It's a slow moving change taking over a long time, but at the same time, it has very important impact on the sea and on the life on the sea. And then very far into the ocean surface at a great depth. It's almost nothing infrequent, invariant character. The sea and the nature and the geographical features are virtually changeless. So time moves at three levels. That's a very complex scenario. And then he compared this with the history of human, like the events, particularly political events, the change of rulership, this very quick movements and dramatic movements in political social life, which may come for a short period, but then also goes away. He considered this to be sort of uh, the the fireflies of history, and did not pay much attention to events. On the other hand, the slow moving changes at the conjuncture, these take very long time but impacts major change. At another level, at the greatest depth of the sea, it is almost invariant. The structure, the unchanging structure, it is very difficult to replicate the three levels of time operating in any place of the globe following the Mediterranean model. In the case of Indian scenario, I would come here. The importance of the Indian Ocean and also the subcontinent in historical terms is are very crucial. First of all, whenever we talk of the South Asian subcontinent, it immediately gives a visualization of a vast mass of land and essentially agricultural, with a large number of rivers, most of which are uh, yielding, are nourishing fertile lands and yielding excellent crops. And the entire historiography, largely of India, over a very long period, is often seen from the North Indian perspective, that is, and particularly the Ganga Valley situation, as if that is the matrix applicable to the entire subcontinental experience for over a very long period. That is the problem. Because we tend to sort of forget and are not perhaps willing to also observe that, first of all, the sea is on three sides of the subcontinent. The Indian Ocean, the uniqueness of the Indian Ocean is that it's the only enclosed ocean in the world. Take, for example, technically, theoretically, at least possible to sail from the North Pole to the South Pole, and vice versa in the case of the Atlantic and the Pacific. You can't do this in the case of Indian Ocean, because the Indian subcontinent and then north of it, the Himalayas, provide a block. That's why it's an enclosed sea. It is an unique feature, and there is no other parallel to that. So the enclosed ocean and the subcontinent, along with Sri Lanka, stands at the very center of the Indian Ocean. That's an inescapable geographical reality. If one has to talk in terms of a long term structure, some kind of a continuity, very slow changes in the Indian Ocean history and the Indian subcontinent in terms of the maritime experience, there are possibly two characters. One is the immense importance and influence of the monsoon wind system. The monsoon wind system is not only important for the two main rainy seasons in the subcontinent, absolutely essential and indispensable the for the people of India. Still, India is largely an agricultural country, and very large number of people's life depend the on the on a good monsoon. On the other hand, the monsoon's wind system with its nearly predictable alterations, the two monsoons, this is absolutely crucial for crossing the Indian Ocean maritime space, either from the western to the eastern termini or vice versa. So the monsoon has an impacted and still continues to impact the movement across the Indian Ocean. Though, of course, I'm talking of the time before the advent of the steam navigation. Steam navigation changed things to a great extent. But prior to steam navigation in the Indian Ocean, the entire movement across the Indian Ocean is totally guided by and dependent on the near predictable alterations of the monsoon wind. So that is almost a constant and infrequent structure. The other point is, I would also just add 2 points. We've talked about the very close interactions between the Indian Ocean sailing and the monsoon system. I have to also add the monsoon system is only seen in the northern Indian Ocean. There is no geographical phenomenon or climatic phenomenon called the monsoon south of the 10 degrees south latitude. So when we talk of the monsoon sailings in the Indian Ocean, it is essentially the northern sector of the Indian Ocean. So with that, the other almost nearly invariant character in the Indian Ocean maritime history is the ubiquitous sailing crafts made of timber, and those logs of wood are usually tied together by coconut coir. Coconut is not only gives us an excellent nourishing fruit, but is absolutely indispensable for the construction, manufacturing of the typical Indian Ocean uh, sailing crafts. Interestingly, both the coastal strips, the western seaboard and the eastern coast, are noted for excellent timber, and also the coconut plantations are plenty. While, take for example, in the two western channels, sea lanes of the Indian Ocean, that is the Persian Gulf and the Arabic and the Red Sea, for a very long time, the Red Sea area and also the Persian Gulf sailing crafts were also built on the same principle, the wooden logs tied together by coconut coir. And these areas are not known to have their own resources of these two vital ingredients. So the India subcontinent is seen as one of the major providers of these two indispensable resources for making the sailing crafts. So that is why, and the coastal people, which means that those whose life depend on the sea, that would mean the crew, the navigator, the sea captain, the uh, merchants who take to the sea, sometimes preachers of certain faiths did take to the sea, the and also the pirates. Their lives are dependent on the sea. If there is no sea, these people will not be able to exist. I'm taking an historical, I'm not supporting piracy, of course, but piracy is a given fact in the Indian Ocean scenario. So that is why one has to take into account that by merely looking at essential the rural, agrarian, landlocked experience of the subcontinent, particularly of the North Indian situation. North India is a landlocked area. In order to look at the sea and the coast, one really has to look particularly at the Trans-Vindhyan area. So that is also an uh, important aspects of studying the subcontinent history, which cannot be reduced merely to the experience, very long experience of people's life, only in terms of North Indian plains. So this is my, and this is something historians of the Indian Ocean say from the uh, 1960s, late 60s, throughout the 90s, pointed out. I would like to mention Shindas Gupta, then uh, S. Arasaratnam, particularly on the east coast of India, Professor Om Prakash, but of the slightly later times of the Dutch factory records. And these were the masters who, and along with that, the broad sweep came from Michael Pearson. So these are the founding fathers of the Indian Ocean, not merely seeing as naval battle, naval diplomacy, etc., etc.
If we could turn to perceptions of the sea in early India, this is something that has often been framed through two rather opposing lenses. One strand of scholarship, drawing on normative Brahmanical texts such as the Manusmriti and the Arthashastra, has emphasized injunctions that appear to cast the sea as a ritually problematic space. In these texts, merchants and merchant groups are seen as morally suspect actors and agents of potential disorder. This has been taken to suggest a broader cultural reluctance towards seafaring within the subcontinent. In contrast, another historiographical approach, taking inspiration from the European discourse on seascapes, has foregrounded the sea as an arena for the assertion of political sovereignty. Here, perceptions of the sea were shaped by territorial and political objectives, with various states, both inland and coastal, invoking maritime space in the projection of their authority. Now, since both these frameworks have been substantially re-evaluated by scholars, what might be a more appropriate schema for thinking about early Indian perceptions of the sea?
First of all, when we are trying to assess and have build up some idea about uh, the the perspectives of the very remote times toward the sea space, you are referring to the uh, the two major normative Sanskrit treatises, the Arthashastra of Kautilya and the Manusmriti. Now, both the texts and also a number of Sanskrit normative treatises, which are generally called the Dharma Shastra, the Shastras. These are first of all normative treatises. And normative treatises from the point of view of the Sanskritic, Brahmanical notions of society and culture. However important these texts are for understanding early India, we have to keep in mind these are recommendations. And in no society in the world, the precepts and practices match 1:1. That is impossible. Now, first, the let me talk a little bit about the Artha. The Arthashastra is known for its great suspicion about merchants and artisans. In the sections on criminal justice called Kantaka Shodhan in the Arthashastra, literally meaning purification of the thorns, that is, thorns to the interest of the political authority. Kantaka is thorn, Shodhan is purification. And who are brought under this category? The Vaidehakas, the merchants, and Karu, that is the artisans. These are hugely seen from the point of view of Arthashastra. These are suspect elements and always brought under category. They are discussed from the point of view of criminal justice system. That's why in the Arthashastra, the terms like Srishti, Sarthavaha, even the term Banik is not very phrase, Boidehaka, which almost means a peddler. On the other hand, even in terms of the canonical Buddhist texts and Jaina texts, the profession of a merchant is never looked down upon. The Buddhist text would consider that along with agriculture and cattle rearing, Vanijja, that is trade, is one of the Ukkattha Kamma, that is Utkrishta Karma, excellent profession. To the Jainas, trade is considered to be a profession with the least violence, because they consider even during agricultural operations, unconsciously, unknowingly, the cultivator might destroy lives beneath the soil during the time of plowing, while trade is considered to be least violent act. So the ethics from the shamanic groups are completely different from what the Sanskritic normative treatises would preach. Second, now this is an injunction. The Manu Samhita definitely points out that a Brahmana crossing the sea is unfit to be invited for a Shraddha performance. It is there later, more injunctions taking cue from the Manusmriti are imposed on seafaring, leading to the situation that in the early medieval times, the Puranic literature have a very long section on what is called the forbidden acts in the terrible, dreadful Kali age, Kali Bhartya, the functions which are not considered lawful during the age of Kali, Kali Bhartya. A huge amount of discussion will be available on the restricted strictures on going to the sea. And this is over reliance on the normative treatises, particularly Sanskrit normative treatises, as these are reflecting the actual life, led to the understanding that people of the subcontinent rarely took to the sea, and because the sea was, as you said, a polluting area, because during the sea voyage, it is almost impossible to maintain the strict strictures and also the observances regarding varna-jati, regarding food, regarding drinking water, and also the contiguity of persons of different varna-jati layers. Now the point is, there are also evidence, and without evidence we cannot get into the understanding of the past, because none of us were living during the period, say 200 BC or 300 AD or 500 C or 1300 C, 1500 C. We were not there. So only the traces of the past, which after a point of time for the historians become the evidence, the evidentiary corpus from the traces of the past, which are pure accidental traces. We are lucky that these traces are available to us. Then on the sources, the evidence is absolutely essential. Evidence-based study of the past. This is the bedrock of historical studies. Now, there are various types of sources, like what I call the vis-a-vis the prescriptive. There are descriptive category of evidence coming largely from, say, artifactual uh, documentation in the form of ceramic evidence. If you find that all along the eastern seaboard you have the distribution of a particular pottery called the related ware. Related ware, at least according to a very major archaeologist, Gokte, formerly of the Deccan College, it was actually the best possible manufacturing area was the Chandraketugad and the Tamralipta area of ancient Bengal, western part of Bengal, best possible area. But its distribution is seen not only all along the east coast, but also even in Pattanam, in Kerala, even beyond the subcontinent in Sri Lanka and beyond the subcontinent, say in Sembira, in the across the Bay of Bengal, and also in the western part of the Indian Ocean. So these were being carried across the sea, obviously by the seafarers. And these seafarers, not essentially but the people from outside the subcontinent, that non-indigenous people were carrying these transactions, and Indians were mere suppliers, quiet, passive players. No, there are, and this is the description of the actual players on the maritime scenario. You have what I call of crucial significance. I have given this particular uh, uh, phraseology, maritime epigraphy. Inscriptions are often seen as royal records talking about the court, panegyrics, prashastis, and then the wars, dynastic details. Inscriptions even within the courtly documentations. You have the occasional indications of what was actually happening. And there are inscriptions, particularly donative records. People, non-royal people, were donating for certain acts of merit. I'll give two such cases. One coming from the west coast, and the inscription is from Kanheri in the at a northern suburb of present-day Mumbai. Is a wonderful and very famous Buddhist cave site, and such cave dwellings, artificial excavation of caves within the Sahyadri ranges there. It required investment and patronage, two mainly for the Shramanic groups, largely the Buddhist establishments. In around, it's difficult to date because not many of these are dated. But if there is, among many, there is a remarkable inscription that for a Buddhist acharya, the Gana, that is a professional combination who are calling themselves Sagara Pala, the protector of the sea. They were making this donation. These are typical coastal people. I do not know exactly what they mean by, they are not political powers, but possibly employed by a political power to look at the security of the coastal area, particularly around the port. If one takes into account that the in the periplus of the Eritrean Sea, the anonymous author tells us that the passage to enter and to get out of the famous port of Barugaza, that is Broch of present-day Gujarat, it was a very difficult and treacherous passage, and difficult for enter and exit for the non-local vessels. So under the service of the local ruler, Mambanus, that is Nahapanu of the western of the Kshatrapa ruler of western India, Gujarat area. Local fishermen were offering some kind of what may be called nowadays a piloting service. And it is down below in the western Deccan, in present coastal Maharashtra, which is called Aparanta in ancient times. There are a similar group of peoples. And there are ports in the Konkan area. The other such case is coming from Sri Lanka at the place called Godavaya, which has yielded a very interesting, now a major field of research called marine archaeology, where the shipwrecks are being salvaged in a very systematic way along with the cargoes. These are unfortunate scenarios. After all, people and the cargoes were lost. Mostly people were definitely, there were very rare cases of any survival of human beings. But these give some impact on the life on the sea. The structure of the boat, it sank at a place called Godavaya, at the southernmost tip of Sri Lanka. This place is also figuring in an inscription nearly contemporary, datable early second century CE, telling that the place was called Gothapavata. It was This was the original name from which the name Godavaya has come, Gothapavata, where there was also a Buddhist Sangha. The local ruler is calling it a patana, that is a patana or a port area, where from the shuka, that is shulka, tolls and customs realized by the political authority would now be transferred in favor of the Buddhist monastery. And this is an indigenous craft. This is not a craft from the Mediterranean. So people were definitely taking to the sea. The best epigraphic evidence in a large corpus is coming from the island of Socotra in the Gulf of Aden, far away from India. This is the work of Ingo Strauch and his colleagues in a book called Foreign Sailors on Socotra. Socotra has yielded number of inscriptions from people from Palmyra, from Ethiopia. There are Greek inscriptions, but the largest body of epigraph, 193, it's not a small number, written in Sanskrit language and in Brahmi, datable paleographically between the 1st and the 5th century CE. These are not the typical land grants or the courtly panegyrics, the prashastis of the ruler, not even donative records, usually seen in the case of the Buddhist and Jain establishments. These are, you may call, the visitors' record. People just on reaching Socotra Island and or departing from it, sort of engraved their names, along with occasionally the figures of the sailing crafts. Now, there the names of actual Indic passengers are figuring. They obviously sailed, and they're telling that the two Indic ports are figuring there. They're sailing from the areas of Bharukacha, Broj, and also Hastagabapra, that is Hatab, another not as important as Barugaza, but that another Gujarati port. And so the names of actual sailors, along with the crew, Navika, or the navigator, Niriyamaka, they have also written their names. So they are literate people, unlike the inscriptions figuring in, say, Sachi Bharut, where the donor has donated, patronized, but may not have written the actual record. But here you don't carry with you across the sea the professional scribe or the professional engravers. Obviously, the persons who wrote their names were literate people. That is, in fact, an interesting scenario. And this is the largest number of the epigraphic records from Socotra in an island. And largest number of visitors record are from Indic people. So the Indic people definitely did take to the sea, and there are many other evidence, many other evidence on this. So the story that Indians did not take to the sea because of the Shastric injunction is, let me put it very sharply, is rubbish. Otherwise, take for example how you see the Indic cultural elements in both maritime and mainland Southeast Asia. Did people walk across the Bay of Bengal unless and until you take to the sea? That's simple.
Since you were talking about the importance of sources, and sources are, of course, central to history writing, and the question of how to work with them becomes especially important in the case of the Cairo Geniza documents from the 11th and 12th centuries, which have presented scholars with tremendous opportunities for historical analysis. Geniza research has opened up a venues for reconstructing social and economic life across the medieval Indian Ocean. However, these documents have also thrown up unique methodological challenges owing to their fragmented nature and also their scattered distribution across libraries in Europe and America. In working with a source base of this nature, what methodological opportunities and difficulties did you encounter in attempting to draw both micro historical insights and broader generalizations, especially with reference to reconstructing the contours of what S.D. Goldine calls the India trade? And how do you read these documents together with literary and epigraphic evidence from the Indian subcontinent?
I'm very thankful for raising this point, and uh, Geniza documents are absolutely crucial to understand the Indian Ocean scenario, roughly from the late 11th, very late 11th, particularly 12th century, up greater parts of 13th, but the India traders, the Jewish, not Indian traders, the Jewish merchants who regularly visited India, particularly the west coast, mostly Malabar coast, to some extent Goa region, and partly also Konkan area, Thana, and occasionally in Bharuch and some of the Gujarati ports, including Diu, most probably. This is their area of operation. They are rarely seen in the eastern seaboard. Once, twice, a few references are there that these Jewish merchants actually sailed up to northern uh, northern Sumatra, possibly to get camphor. Uh, but this is their area. Let me put first of all the how I got into Geniza records. This is entirely my indebtedness is incalculable to Ashin Das Gupta. I was never a student. He was not my supervisor, so as to stay. I never sat in his class. I did not even uh, I did not even uh, belong to the teaching department he headed. That is Department of History, Vishwabharati. That was my first teaching job. I was the junior most teaching faculty way back in the early 80s in Department of Ancient Indian History, Culture and Archaeology. I met Professor Dasgupta there, and in typical Vishwabharati parlance, I called him Oshinda. Nobody called sir or madam in Vishwabharati, Dada or Didi. So he became Oshinda for me. And somehow he spotted my interest in trade, to some extent, a little bit on India's maritime connections. These were the sort of, I had not even completed my PhD at the time. I was teaching and doing the final part of my PhD dissertation. Then began the interactions. He somehow spotted that I was interested in the history of trade and traders. And one day he took, one day in his own inimitable, uh, very simple statements, he hinted that uh, why wouldn't I sort of look at the India seaborne character, not only trade, but people along the seaboard prior to 1500. His logic was he and his similar scholars, both India and abroad, mainly worked from the period of crucial 3 centuries, 1500 to 1800. Obviously, on the basis of the European archives, Shinda was himself a master of Dutch documentation. Other people and most people relied on the most voluminous archival material of the English East India Company. So he suggested that most people on Indian Ocean studies are looking at the crucial 3 centuries that led to the incorporation of the Indian Ocean in the then world system, the emerging capitalist system, then the marginalization of the Indian Ocean from the from as it became a British colony from late 19th, mid 19th century onwards, or late 18th century onwards, and gradually became ultimately a British lake. That was essentially the work they were doing. And he sort of suggested to me that if, with my familiarity with Sanskrit sources, is it possible to look to the situation prior to the 1500? That was the beginning. So this was a completely new field. I never heard of brothel before that, or say the similar other scholars, particularly the wonderful work in the published in 1955, written much earlier, that is uh, uh, the Van Leer's book on Indonesian trade and society. These were completely unknown world to me. So I was gradually reading those things where I was immensely drawn to it. But then Ashin Das Gupta one day brought before me a book called, this was by S.D. Goitein, Letters of the Medieval Jewish Traders. There were samples of letters from Egypt, largely from the Cairo Geniza, also relating to the northern part of the Mediterranean, Sicily, and other Roman areas. Also, in the case of Spain, Al-Andalus, the Spanish area, but there were about 9 to 10 such letters connecting with the subcontinent. This is my first exposure through the translations of Goitein. I was absolutely stunned. I could not imagine that this kind of letters from the actual participants in the Indian Ocean trade are available. This was a completely new world. I still have the book, Ashinda's own book, to me after he passed away. His wife, Uma Das Gupta, gifted this book, that you give this book. So still it is with me and I often use it. Then I became familiar with the world of S.D. Goitein. The Geniza, now the Geniza means, it's derived from a Persian ganj, to mean something where you can store something. And what you store? Geniza actually means according to the Jewish customs, you cannot destroy or put to fire, throw any document on paper, anything written on paper where the name of God figures. So the discarded, useless letters and documents were dropped in the Jewish synagogue. Technically, all Jewish synagogues must have such a geniza, which is a receptacle, a storehouse of discarded papers. Actually, it means a vast waste paper basket. You don't need those documents and you drop. Actually, it's a kind of a garbage, useless letters. This was the largest geniza was available in a particular synagogue in Old Cairo, Al-Fushtat. And there the geniza documents are there from 800 CE to about 1800 CE. When these were, the historical importance of the geniza was known with the late 18th century, with the Napoleonic invasion of Egypt. Gradually, people understood what a treasure of one has hit upon. Then there was scramble for this geniza, already torn papers, discarded papers, then there was a scramble for procuring these materials. And that's why, as Ishani very rightly pointed out, it is strewn over different parts of the globe. And from these torn, mutilated, or partially available letters, sometimes you are lucky if you get the full letter and document, business document, partnerships, legal court cases among the different participants. These were studied by Guillotine, many others, but Guillotine is the towering figure. I would also point out there a little bit of historiography, which I came to know recently through the courtesy of a dear student of mine, Dr. Digvijay Kumar Singh, who did his PhD with me, and now he teaches in Cotton University in Guwahati. He one day in JNU pointed to me, "Sir, have you seen this work by Peter N. Miller, Brodel-Guillotine Correspondence?" Brodel came to know about Guillotine's initial interest in the India trade. That was the basis, the beginning of his interest, the India traders, because he was also looking at the very close interaction between the Jewish merchants and the Arabic world. Because these documents are written in the Arabic, was the lingua franca. Some Hebrew words are there, but it is essentially in colloquial Arabic, which is called Judeo-Arabic technically. And I am no scholar of Arabic. I do not know Arabic. I only use the translation of the fascinating documents. This was the Guillotine's primary interest, and what it named as India book. He never ever published the whole book in his lifetime, but continuously edited, translated some of these letters till perhaps mid 50s or late 50s. Then, according to him, he sailed for the Mediterranean, leaving the Indian Ocean. His interest then was on the Mediterranean scenario captured by these Geniza documents. And that led to, from the mid 60s, the 6-volume massive work, A Mediterranean Society. Interestingly, by this time, Brodel in France was also trying to look at the maritime scenario of the Mediterranean. And this was a different kind of the voice of the actual merchants even before 1500. So Brodel was interested. There were some initial collaborations, but then they parted ways with very sharp difference in perspective. I'll give one such indication. Guillotine categorically wrote and deviated from the collaboration with Brodel that your interest is in economic history, particularly merchants' economic activities. And then he says, I quote, "I shall never write economic history. My job is to edit, translate, and comment on these letters. Economic history will be done by the specialists." They parted ways. But interestingly, the first volume of Brodel's megascopic A Mediterranean Society is called Economic Foundation. That is something you do not know. These contradictions happen with great scholars. But he had left actually the main thrust on the Indian Ocean was essentially connected with the Mediterranean project. But continuously wrote at least once or two such complex letters till the very end of his life. The last work he did was published after 1986. He passed away in 1985. These were being brought out in technical journals, and I was closely following. But I also understood that with the help of Indic sources, both literary and particularly epigraphic records, you can perhaps understand some of the typical features of this Jewish India merchants who often collaborated with their Indian counterparts in the coastal societies along the entire Western Sea. I'll give you one such case to illustrate. Among many players of the Jewish Jewish merchants coming to India, they usually came from even as far as Al Mahdia, that is Tunisia, even some Al Andalus, that is southern part of Spain, reached the Mediterranean, came to Egypt, then under the first Fatimid Caliphate 969 to 1160s, then the following other powers, ultimately with the very powerful Mamluk Sultanate. Uh, this particular Egypt, almost acting like a hinge between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea part of the Indian Ocean, was an ideally suitable place for this contact. These Jewish merchants then sailed out from Egypt. Please remember, there is no Suez Canal. So they have to come down through the port called Kos. And then there is another port called Aidha, extremely inhospitable place, but good for the journeys and the port location. From there, they would come to Aden, which is a big major hub, and the large Jewish merchants present there is actually a representative of the Jewish merchant at Aden. From Aden, with the use of with the southwest monsoon, they will reach Malabar port and also other Indic ports. So one such player is called the is named in this Geniza as a person called uh, this is a Jewish Indic merchant. His name is it will come back to me. He is known as a ship owning merchant, which is requiring the maximum investment because this is a riskiest business. The, uh, he originally was a betel nut seller. Betel nuts have nothing to do with shipping business. Betel nut is coming from the coastal areas of the Deccan in a very large number, and the figure repeatedly in the inscriptions, Sanskrit inscriptions from Konkan, and also Canarese inscription from slightly interior. This is a bulk agricultural product, nothing of a luxury product. It touches the life of the people every day. It's part of the rituals. It's part of any auspicious family, okay, like marriage or other meeting points. It is often made as a gift to a political authority. If you want to visit, you bring the what is called in Pugo. The name of this person is Ali Mansur Al Fawfali. If while Goethe talked about this person, he took the help from Basham in those days in SOAS, School of Oriental African Studies in London University. And Basham said that most likely it's a betel nut sailor. How to connect? Suddenly I came across merchants who are selling what is called in Sanskrit Pugo. Pugo, then the Prakrit version Fuafala, that is Fofal one, who deals in Fofal is Fofali. So it is ultimately with this kind of Indic source materials, some of the vocabularies used in this Jewish Judeo-Arabic Geniza documents can become very closely intelligible and shows once again what you pointed out in the very beginning, the interactions between the sea, the sailing crowds, the voyages, the commodities, and the interior. This, and it is not a luxury product, unlike muslin or precious gold or silver or fine textiles or say the Malabari black pepper, which is called by Romila Thapar as black gold. It is a daily necessity product, and the importance of daily necessity products across the sea is writ large in the Geniza document. You don't see this kind of information anywhere else. Can we imagine that in ships leaving Malabar coast to Aden and then farther into the Red Sea Orient destinations, regular shipment of 6 varieties of Indian iron, raw material and also sometimes finished iron were taken on board of the ships. This is nothing of a luxury item. This is a raw material impacting the life of the people, ordinary people. It's not an expensive item. So my interest is not only in the sea trade, but also the commodities that I am trying to often assess the importance of the daily necessity bulk product in the shipping activities, because for a very simple reason, if you do not load the load the bottom of the ship with heavy items, the ship won't sail, it will sink. That is the basic point, and you have to do that with, say, cargo like heavy metals like Indic iron, or with very large number of such betel nut or areca nut. Yes, there. With that you have the Malabari pepper, black kali mirch. Definitely, it is a very major commodity. So this is the way people and the interactions between the Indic merchants in the coast. After all, the Jewish merchants were almost like a diasporic community. They need to have been in touch with the local people. One such case is that, and the remarkable cooperation. There are cases of litigations, partnerships, and perhaps litigations arising out of partnerships among different merchants. Even court cases are there. But beyond that, there is a writ large is the cooperation and the trust and the friendly interaction among different types of merchants. In one case, a Jewish merchant is falling a victim of piracy near Thana. He loses many of his items. The letters are replete with exchange of information along with the importance of what may be called commercial intelligence. This exchange of information is fascinating. His sad luck has reached the ears of another Jewish merchant residing at that time at Al Manjarur, that is Mangaluru. He writes to this unfortunate merchant that please try to come back to Mangalore. We shall sail together back to the Aden. If you need money, because he has lost everything, if you need money, please take it from Nakhuda, that is ship owner, Tinbu, who is an Indic ship owner. He is not a Jewish ship owner, Arabic ship owner. Take the money as much as you want, then comes the bit, because between him, that is the Jewish merchant at Mangalore, and the Nakhuda, Tinbu, there are inseparable bonds of brotherhood and friendship. That is the crucial aspect. This kind of impressions from the actual participants in the act of seafaring are not captured on a regular basis in any other kinds of sources. I'm not telling these are fully I would say the standalone sources. No source can be standalone. But with indigenous documentation, you can better hear the voices of the players on the sea. That is my point.
So, Professor, in your work on trade in early India, you have consistently advocated against the indiscriminate use of terms such as traders, merchants, or trade centers, preferring instead historically specific terms such as Penta, Nagaram, Sartavaha, Novittaka, etc. Could you perhaps elaborate on how this kind of contextual specificity complicates our more general terminology and what this reveals about the differentiated nature of commercial actors and spaces in early India? Relatedly, the conventional dichotomy between rural and commercial economies has also been rethought of in light of the existence of a plethora of intermediary supralocal sites acting as links between rural and urban centers, facilitated by agrarian expansion, the availability of exchangeable crops, and the emergence of regional powers. What bearing does this have on our understanding of physical mobility, communication networks, and resource circulation within what has often been described as a closed feudal economy?
Right. Uh, it's you have touched upon in one sentence many aspects of a particular situation in pre-modern South Asian history. I think you are referring to the time which is called early medieval, stretching from 500, 600 C to about 1300. This was what is early medieval seen as a transition from ancient or early historic to towards the medieval was a contribution from two fascinating Marxist historians, one Didi Kosambi to start with, then mostly by R.S. Sharma, the iconic historian on the early medieval India with his classic Indian feudalism and other works. Also, his close associates like D.N. Jha, K.M. Shrimali, Keshavan Velutat in South India, Rajan Gurukkal also contributed immensely, telling that this was a period of change with the emergence of a new kind of source material, the copper plate records of revenue transfers or transfer of landed properties, mostly to religious, ecclesiastical institutions and persons. In short, it started first in the Deccan, not on the copper plates by the Satavahana rulers, then became from 200 late 3rd century C, particularly from 300 onwards, it gradually became a subcontinental character, except perhaps Kashmir, where we do not come across copper plates. This kind of charters, revenue free transfer of landed properties in favor of a single Brahmana or a large number of Brahmanas or to religious institution like a Buddhist monastery. Nalanda is a classic case. A Buddhist monastery, a Jaina establishment, or a Brahmanical temple. So the resource transfer by an administrative authority. Take, for example, if one goes to, I do not know if you people have visited the fascinating Brihadishwara temple in Tanjavur. The outer surface of the temple wall, I'm not telling the perimeter wall, actual temple wall is a virtual archive because Rajaraja lavishly patronized this royal monumental temple and recorded the transfer of revenue from various parts of his extensive realm, including from the conquered areas of Sri Lanka. So all this, it's almost a public archive if one is familiar with the script in those days and now the paleographic persons. They have edited this. Now, this was something of a completely new kind of a source material, and thanks to R. Sharma and his colleagues, they indicated sources are the products of their time and society and culture. And therefore, to understand early medieval India, the land grant documents are of central importance. And if you bring suddenly a source material pertaining to 1st century CE, a Kushana record vis-a-vis the land grants, this will be a mismatch. The temporal and the spatial elements are crucial to understand the nature of the sources. Now, these source materials also, naturally, these are all landed property transfers. And landed property transfers are taking place in rural areas, rarely in urban areas. But rural areas, so the rural society, rural culture, and obviously the agrarian scenario loom very large in those records, particularly the nature of the plots given, the varieties of land, the actual owners, the enjoyers, and those. Take, for example, neither the Brahmanas nor the Buddhist monks or Jaina monks are expected to till the cultivated areas they have been endowed with. So there are actual cultivators who obviously did not own the land. So this layered relationship in the land landed possessions, they can be cleaned by a meticulous study of these land grounds. But it has also given, because it deals essentially the rural world, it gives only the image of the rural society, leading almost to an obfuscation of the non-rural areas. This actually led R.S. Sharma and many of his colleagues, including to some extent by Didi Kosambi, that early medieval India is essentially a ruralized landscape where, according to Sharma, I'm not getting you are familiar with that. Your question tells that. Uh, the famous phrases urban anemia and monetary anemia. Because in the land grant does not refer to the use of coins. The land grants rarely talked about the big cities, and Sharma presented archaeological evidence of the desertions and decay of cities. There is famous work, Urban Decay in India, 300, 1000. And then his main point was India's vibrant long distance trade, including seaborne long distance trade, was waning out because largely of the demise of the Roman Empire with which India had a very thriving contact. And therefore, if the long distance trade declined, the relevance of actually minted metallic pieces, that is currency, becomes almost negligible. That's why monetary anemia and urban anemia, these are his words, not my words. But if you use the word anemia, then you reflect, you talk about the disease situation. It's a kind of a gloom, the diseased condition. Anemia is a disease condition after all. Then there, even Sharma and the fascinating work of B.D. Chattopadhyay, using the same land grants, telling that two things. Number one, there is incontrovertible epigraphic evidence of the unprecedented degree of rural expansion, which you pointed out also. And the rural expansion would ultimately lead to the availability of larger number of greater bulk of agrarian commodities, which is not merely meant for consumption at the area of production. And this particular understanding of Sharma and his colleagues led to also the formulation, the impact of the land grant led to the enclosed and self-sufficient villages. No contact with the outside world, so little innovative culture, it's almost a closed world. The entire early medieval period is seen like that. Now, the point is, can Indian villages be considered self-sufficient? And therefore, it does not need to be contact with other areas. Two absolutely indispensable, essential ingredients in rural life is salt, without which, whether you are rich or the poorest of the poor, you cannot survive. The other is even for agricultural operations, the use of the iron tools. Does each and every Indian village have an local availability of these two vital ingredients? Not everywhere you get salt, not everywhere you can get an iron ore deposit. So the very requirement of getting these, sometimes from distant places, would break down this image of self sufficiency of Indian villages and their enclosed character. And then I'll very briefly point it out the fascinating little book, a little bit also written in terse and dense prose by B.D. Chattopadhyay, Aspects of Rural Settlements and Rural Society in Early Medieval India, where he points out by taking mostly epigraphic documentation from three disparate regions: Bengal, a deltaic region, very dry and almost desert like Rajasthan, and Karnataka, which is on a plateau, where he shows the importance of hydraulic resources and innovations leading to the betterment of agricultural production. Even Rajasthan, a dry, dreary, arid area, was occasionally yielding even two types of crops, summer crops and winter crops, including paddy. And what would be the impact? Let me last. This is a classic case pointed out by V.D. Chattopadhyay. There was a village in Rajasthan called Notdula. According to the inscription, it was associated with 12 other villages, possibly nearby villages, along with Notdula, which almost took the character of a nodal point. So after a while, Notdula became a Mandapika, where Mandapika Shulka could be levied. Now, Mandapika is what is present a Mandi in most of North Indian areas. Western UP, Haryana, Rajasthan, Punjab, you have profusion of mandis. Grain market and daily necessity bulk item are largely exchanged there. The beginning of Mandapika. And then from a village, one village among the 12 villages turns into a Mandapika. Possibly it appears as a node, a nodal point. From there, it's obviously because of the trade in agricultural products, it becomes a Nogar, Pura. Then finally, it turns into the political center of the Nadol Jamanas. This is Nadol. So for this, you didn't require an extraneous, an external stimuli like foreign trade, so as to say. For the demand to meet from a distant place, your production materials are taking some leaps. It is coming from within. And therefore, the land grants itself can speak of these changes. Now, with this, the close interaction between the maritime and the inland society. Take, for example, the famous Kerala black pepper. Is it grown exactly on the land? No. Where on the coast? No. It is on the hillside, barely inland. And it is actually a plant product, perhaps not a luxury item at all in the local Malabar society. When it is shipped out and reaches the consumers of that particular spice, say in Aden or in Egypt, and then across Egypt to Venice, then it becomes a luxury. So the character of the product changes it's a plant product. As I said, and the classic case is of Bengal. Bengal is a land of cowries. Even in the late 18th, early 19th centuries, Bengal, the zamindars who had to then pay the annual khajna to the company, English East India Company, before a particular deadline, the sunset laws. Many of them paid their rent through cowries, even in late 18th, early 19th century. And where the cowries came from in Bengal, Bihar, Orissa, Assam, particularly these areas. None of these areas has their indigenous source of cowries, which come from Maldives. So the cowrie shells are itself marine products brought to the eastern, particularly Bengal Delta area, in shiploads from Maldives. They can never be an indicator of the restrictive trade. They are part and parcel of Indian Ocean trade, and these are in bulk products. So if the Maldivian ships, this is recorded by early 16th century impressions from the Portuguese author of Suma Oriental in 1500, Toma Pires. The Maldivian ships bring shiploads of cowrie shells and take back as return cargo Bengal's paddy, rice, because that's a grain shortage area. None of these items are actually luxury products. The importance of, we always consider long distance trade, particularly seaborne trade, is essentially that of luxury items. This is recently brought to our notice by some of the actual shipwrecks salvaged in the Indonesian archipelago area. The excavation of a shipwreck site called Belitung, close to the Javanese Sea area, first noted in 1993. This is a ship typically Indian Ocean, as I said, the log built and tied with coconut coir. This kind of ship was coming back from China. Just see its range of operations, possibly with also some materials, say from the Persian Gulf area. So it's possibly started from Persian Gulf area, reached right up to China, coming back with Chinese potteries. As I said, these are, as some of you mentioned, the actual material. These are the materials. And the Chinese materials, the potteries, nowadays the ceramic studies of Chinese potteries have reached such degree of specialization that one could pinpoint the actual kiln, the production site. This was a site called Changsha. One single shipwreck has yielded 55,000 of pottery, and these are with the monotonous, almost hackneyed designs, obviously indicating these were meant for mass production. That was in the hold of the ship, along with some gold objects, which are very few in number. But this ship obviously had to stop at some point, both for their outgoing and the inbound journeys, at some of the Indic ports because of the regimes of the monsoon. You cannot operate in the entire span of the Indian Ocean network without having a stopover at the monsoon, because during the fury of monsoon, all the traditional ports of Indian seaboard are completely shut down. So this, and that is the time when many of the overseas crew, merchants would interact with the local indigenous population with remarkable cultural exchanges. That is the human face of this network. It is not always commodities. And regarding the, the close ties between overseas networks and the ultimate agrarian background, you cannot uh, leave out that is the bulk of the experience, bulk of the life of the people. That's the main the stay of the people. The ships obviously sailed with their sails. What the sail is made of? It's cotton sails. And how you get cotton without the cotton plantation somewhere in the interior? It's an agrarian plant product, not a cereal, not something eatable, but which is a cash crop. So this is it's a life of the people that is revealing, rather than of the exciting story of shipment of luxury products.
So we wanted to shift slightly to questions of state formation in early India and the forces that underpin this process. In recent historiography, the extension of the agrarian frontier throughout the early historic and early medieval periods in the Indian subcontinent has been considered to have momentous consequences, especially in the process of regional state formation. Agrarian surplus has traditionally been considered as the prime mover of state society. Your work, on the other hand, has focused on the role of non agrarian activities in the phenomenon of state formation, especially the role of traders as opposed to Brahmins in the penetration of state society in peripheral regions. Does this call for a revisitation of our conceptions about state formation, which can now perhaps be seen as achieved via the dual axes of agriculture and commerce in synthetic mode? Within this context, how important does the struggle among the inland polities for control over the coastal area, or conversely, the pull towards the coast, become?
Uh, Thank you very much. This is an intricate question. The uh, I would first begin by telling that the making of the state, or more pertinently, as Bidi Chattopadhyay pointed out, the state society is a very complex society, sharply differentiated, hierarchized. That's why it needs a political structure, a political entity like the state that will not uh, erase the differentiation. It won't bring egalitarianism. But amidst all this hierarchy and inequality, particularly in a country like India, the very sharp inequality in the varna-jati status, the gender equality, some kind of an order is maintained by a political structure, obviously to the advantage of the higher echelons of the society. Now, after all, if you look at all the major normative treatises or the land grants or the descriptions in non-canonical literary texts, both in Sanskrit or Pali or in Prakrit, that the primacy of agricultural operations can never be set aside. Particularly, the Indian subcontinent has many, many fertile areas. North India has not only very fertile areas watered by life-giving streams of the Ganga, Yamuna, the Sindhu also, I'm talking of the pre-modern, not the nation state of India, and the Brahmaputra, and numerous other streams, many of which come from the Himalayan glacial origin. So these are largely perennial sources of water. While in the south, there are mighty rivers, but all these are rain-fed rivers. So there is no river in the peninsular part which is coming out of the glacial origin, entirely dependent on the monsoon. So, and agrarian resources, even the Mughal Empire is sustained by agrarian resources. And you look at Irfan Habib's classic work, the agrarian system of the Mughal Empire, that brings it out. His Atlas of the Mughal Empire would bring it out. And so agrarian situation and agrarian operations are absolutely crucial. And agrarian resources, which is the most secure resources for the maintenance of the state structure, is appropriated by the state authority, usually the monarchical political structure, with the apex political authority being the ruler himself. Now, this agrarian demand, which we can see as early as the Arthashastra state, you can also see in some of the early canonical Buddhist Pali canonical texts, definitely in the Mauryan records, like Ashoka says in the case of his very well-known Rumindai pillar inscription, that he visited the place of the nativity of the Buddha, Lord Buddha, Hide Buddhe Jate Sakya Muniti, and that's why, out of the respect to the his veneration for the Buddha, he completely did away with the tax called bali, an agrarian demand, ubalike, utbalike, completely exempted the village from bali and also reduced the share of the agricultural produce. Did not mention what is the reduced share, possibly from 1/6, and he said that 1/8. So even after the reduction, the demand is at least 12%, 12% and a half. It's fairly steep demand from agrarian resources. And so agrarian resources are absolutely indispensable, essential for the making of the state. But at the same time, if I start with the Kautilya Arthashastra, which is the best known text on recommendative text on political economy, there is the name of an high ranking functionary named Samaharta, one who properly collects Samyak Aharana, that he is Samaharta. You may say the collector general of resources, in this case, the revenue. And Kautilya starts that the Samaharta should supervise 7 heads of revenue. What are these 7? Durga, which is not Killa or fort, but actually meaning fortified urban centers, in this case, possibly the capital of a particular state, Durga. Rashtra. Rashtra today we mean by state or by nation state. In Hindi it is Rashtrabad in the sense of nationalism. Rashtra means only the territory, possibly the populated territory like the Janapada. Agrarian sector vis-a-vis the urban area. Durga is urban area, then comes Rashtra. Then comes Khani, the mines and mineral resources. Number 4 is Setu, not bridge, but hydraulic irrigation projects, which are considered to be yielding taxes to the state treasury. And then Bona, which is, you can understand, forest area, Braja, which is pasture area, and then Panikpata, that is trade routes. So out of the 7, technically only 2 are specifically connected to agrarian operation. One is the Rashtra sector from the countryside, and then the irrigation demands from irrigation facility. Other than that, even when the mainstay of the resource mobilization is agrarian sector, they only fall into the 2 categories. The rest 5 belong to the non-agrarian sectors. After all, that city do not belong to the agrarian sector. The khani and the forest and the pasture grounds do not belong to agrarian sector, and obviously Panikpata. But these are also important agrarian revenue resource area and resource mobilization. And that's why you have in the Arthashastra a person called Shulkarthaksha, one who is in charge of collecting, realizing the tolls and customs. And tolls and customs definitely, and also the taxes, even on salt production. Salt, as I said, an absolute essential, indispensable product, item in quotidian life. Even it starts with the Satavahanas. They said that in a particular grant given to the landed property, given to the Buddhist monasteries, that the administrative levy on salt production, salt digging, salt production is considered as a mining activity in early India, completely under the royal prerogative. But it could be leased out to non-state producers. So in that case, the salt is salt is subject to a levy. Similarly, artisanal levies are there. In epigraphic records, there are indications of the artisanal levies. And the classic instance is very large inscription, 592, coming almost at the close of the 6th century in in the the Balavi area, in the Maitraka realm in Gujarat. It's an inscription having 72 clauses, all referring to a special provisions given to a, a body of merchants called Bonigram. Bonigrama does not mean here a village of merchants. That will be a wrong translation. Grama also has a sense of collective. When you say Swarab Gram, 7 notes, Sare Gama Padani Sa, it's called Swarab Grama, nothing to do with the village. If you say Gunagram, the combination of virtues, excellence. Grama is a collective. Here, this was first pointed out by Didi Kusama, that Bonigrama means a merchant's cooperative body. It's a kind of a guild. These merchants were almost invited, almost like the Kautilya said, Janapada Nivesha, expansion of new villages, a new settlement of merchants at a place called Lohata Gram. And they were giving various facilities, including how to levy on Nila Dumpako. Dumpako means vats, indigo production vats. This is one of the earliest known cases of regular indigo, obviously connected with the textile manufacturing area. And Gujarat, Sarkhej, Ahmedabad is traditionally known as the indigo production area. This is an agrarian plant product. And many, like potters, like bamboo workers, they were also coming under levies. So this is a classic example how merchants' activities and artisanal activities were being levied, and there are some exemptions given to the new settlers who are merchants, Manigram. So this is an interesting case. So the merchants have their importance. And this is my point, that not each and every area in India is blessed with fertility and very good rainfall. There are many areas which are dry, arid, even rain shadow areas. If you go to Konkan area, there's enormous amount of rain. You always see how sometimes Mumbai comes to a complete standstill at the height of monsoon. You often go across the Sahyadri to the Desh area, not Konkanastha but Deshastha area, in particularly southern part of Maharashtra, Vidarbha area. Is extremely dry, prone to long-term drought. So what is the scenario there? This is the area where you have many forest-dwelling groups, many pastoralist groups who are mobile, and they are purveyors of some of the commodities which are procured by merchants who are also mobile. You may send Brahmanas and other agriculturists from afar through a land grant into an unsettled territory, maybe a forest tract, maybe a marshy area, maybe an arid area. But to see the Brahmanas as an harbinger of the state society, it may be possible, it is possible. But no less better candidate are the merchants who are mobile and who are constantly in interaction with the animal breeders, hunting groups, and also the foresters. Take, for example, I'll give you two examples. The elephants, which are meant for royal army, essential component, which are also part and parcel of the demonstration, the actual site of a regalia. Not every area in India yields elephant stocks, and elephant stocks cannot be straightforward procured by the agrarian community. There are elephant tamers, then someone have the elephant, it is then being procured by the merchants and then taken to the royal stables. So there are various links in the chain, and it is the merchant who can penetrate these because he is also mobile. The forest dwellers are not sedentary groups. That is the point of interaction. I have been arguing that, and I'm not by that destabilizing the importance of agrarian resources. That is the prime. But trade offers supplementary resources, particularly to the coastal areas. And therefore, in inscriptions, we find how merchants figure very prominently in, even in land grants from the coastal tracts. Take, for example, the area called uh, in the southernmost part of present-day Konkan, Harepatan, which was known as Balipattan. It's a port area. There, the local Konkani, southern Konkan Silahara ruler is granting exemption of taxes, not typically the agrarian taxes, but taxes on the visiting ships of a particular merchant groups who are close to the port, coming both from overseas areas and also their vessels are plying all along from Thane in northern and Thane and Chaul. Chaul is to the south of Bombay. Thane is a northern suburb of Bombay. From there, coming right up to the port of Balipattan, they are given some special concessions. Like in a well-known, the government can issue the exemptions from entertainment tax of a film. You can get an exemption from sales tax or GST or income tax. But that means this is an exception. The regularity of demand. So there are such cases where the ship owning merchants, whom I call the no vittaka, these are different from other kinds of merchants. And interestingly, as I said, the specificity, no vittaka's figure only in the West Coast inscriptions. They are never found in East Coast. In the East Coast, you find, on the other hand, Mahanavikas, the actual senior mariners, possibly ship captains, all along from the Andhra coast right up to Bengal coast. And these are the localized specificities. Not everything is alike. Not everything is alike. And these groups are particularly in the coastal areas. My interest in the sea and the coast is not merely for trading or long distance. The porosity of the coast, the coastal people have to be always interacting with non-local people. They cannot avoid it. So there are remarkable cultural plurality. I'll give two cases, both from West Coast, one from also East Coast. One is the famous Kollam copper plate, which is in mid 9th century CE. The local Kerala ruler is patronizing a Syrian Christian church, Mar Thoma church, and the typical features of the the exemptions from different types of revenue, some benefits and prestige markers are all sanctioned. Now, along with this is written in Malayalam local language, as you pointed, the regional. It's a regional flavor in the local vernacular. So, Malayalam text, but there are also important witnesses who also leave their signatures. And what are these signatures? Three other languages are there and in different scripts. Arabic language signatures in Kufic script, Middle Persian Pahlavi language and script, and then Hebrew script, obviously Jewish people. In a coastal society, multilinguality is absolutely essential for interactions. this inscription is a usual land grant written basically in Malayalam, having this multiplicity of languages, speaking of openness, multiculturality, promotion of plurality. Take, for example, the case of the Cholas. They were known for their expansion into Sri Lanka by sending overseas campaigns, naval, using their fleets. And then in the Sri Lankan chronicles, they are described as destroying a number of major Buddhist monasteries in Sri Lanka. On the other hand, at the most important port of the Chola realm, that is Nagapattinam, at the Kaveri Delta, you have a Buddhist monastery for which land was given at the request of the ruler from maritime in Southeast Asia, actually from Kararam, the ruler of Kararam area, the Srivijaya area, patronized by Rajaraja Chola, and the grants continued right up to the time of Kulattuka for almost continuously for almost a century in the coastal society. And the Cholas are devout worshippers, staunch worshippers of Shiva. That is well known. And this is the coastal character. The other case is a recent discovery from Bengal. I think it came out in late 2019, 2020, in the beginning. The very well-known Japanese epigraphist, Ryosuke Furui, who was supervised for his PhD thesis by B.D. Chakravarti. They're fascinating decipherer of Bengal inscriptions. He found out a record dated around 1145. It's a Sanskrit record in 7 lines. And Bengal is a typical deltaic area where you have large ports, but numerous riverine ports connecting the sea, the coast, with the deltaic hinterland. In that, what is present day the central deltaic Bengal, Dhaka, Bikrampur, Faridpur area in Bangladesh. This was the ruler of the Burman dynasty. The last ruler is Bhoja. This is the inscription of Bhoja. By ousting these Burman dynasty rulers, the Senas, who came from Karnataka, became the principal political power from late 11th to about early 13th century. Now, Bhoja, he figures only in the first line of the inscription. He is acceding to an administrative measure proposed by and almost put into practice by one of his intermediaries. His name is Sri Obudev. He requests the apex political authority, that is Bhoja, to give assent to what he proposes. He says that from a market center which was under Obudev's, he is a senior functionary. Under his own enjoyment, he is transferring the resources, shulko once again, not agrarian resources, in favor of a sacred shrine. The sacred shrine is something very peculiar by name. It is called, and the date is 1145, Sri Allah Bhattaraka Swami Vihare. The very suffix Vihara immediately shows that this is not a Brahmanical temple. Because Brahmanical temples are called either Devakula or Prasada or Ayatana. The term Mandir, in the sense of a sacred shrine, as a Brahmanical shrine, is of a very recent origin. The usual term of Devakula, Devayatana, or Prasada. None of these terms are here. Vihara is meant for the shamanic institution. But who is this divinity called Allah Bhattaraka? Bhattaraka Swami are honorifics. Who is Allah Muhtaram? Allah is the Sanskritized form of the word Allah, the first known such Sanskritization in anywhere in India, 1145. Allah Akbar. So this is a shrine, Islamic shrine, which is being patronized with the order of a ruling power in local area who is a staunch Vaishnava ruler. In that area, in the typical delta coastal belt, this area is also noted for many practicing Buddhist activities, including during the reign of this Vaishnava dynasty, many Buddhist manuscripts were copied. So this, in spite of their strong Vaishnava leaning, there was no bar in the flourishing of Buddhist cultural practices. That's why the rulers of this area would try to figure out an Islamic shrine as a vihar. So this is, and the arrangements are done, and the last section is very interesting. There is a caution that nobody should disturb or hamper this administrative arrangement to patronize at the order of the of Bhojavarman, at the request of his subordinate functionary, to patronize this Islamic shrine. Anyone causing an harm to this arrangement of patronage to the Islamic shrine, there is a curse. Their father would become donkeys. And interestingly, at the end of the record, there is an engraving, not very clear, of a donkey. It's almost an audiovisual effect. This is typical of a coastal society. And please note, it would mean that merchants of followers of Islam were fairly regularly coming to the Bengal coast in early 12th century. This is an act of 1145. It's likely they have been coming a little bit earlier. At least it precedes 6 decades prior to the Delhi Sultanate's conquest of Lucknowti, the seat of Lakshmana Sena, in 1205. This is the character of the coastal society. And I have interest in the making of the coastal polity. In the coastal polity, you will in Indian Ocean scenario, you will rarely find the sea as a contested conflictual zone. Yes, there are piracy. Piracy is definitely a very violent activity. There are cases where the coastal rulers could be in connivance with the pirates. There are also cases, the pirates often, this is the piratical tradition, cultural political tradition, that if a ship, say bound for Kollam, because of a storm, they are led astray, the ship is led astray and reaches Calicut. Then the pirates claim they have a right to looting that particular ship, which is not destined for a particular port. Only in Calicut, in late 15th century, the Samutiri Raja never encouraged this practice and prevented piracy there. That's why the urge to come here. Similarly, in coastal Andhra Pradesh, what is Mudupalli? Mudupalli is close to Masulipatnam in coastal Andhra. In 1245, the very powerful ruler, Kakatiya ruler from Warangal, which is not in the coast, it's far into the interior. He was ruling over this area in the coastal area, issued a charter of security, a stone inscription, charter of Abhaya Shasan, telling that this area was threatened repeatedly by many piratic powers, small local pirates who had some political military advantages, and they looted many ships which are driven by storm, by accident to this port. This is the text of the ruler. I am offering the full security, the charter of security to the voyaging merchants, for whom, this is the fascinating statement, for whom wealth is even dearer than life. Pranebhyopi gariyasi. And that is the recognition of the importance of overseas and coastal trade network, even for a strongly interior based ruler like the Kakatiyas. They were ruling from Warangal. But the importance of trade network as a supplementary resource mobilization is always recognized. That's why the coast has a individuality and also peculiarity in the Indian historical situation, which we often tend to keep it in the background. The coast has its own individuality, and particularly the coastal society is a site for promotion of plurality. I do not know how much this plurality would lead to the what would sort of did it also stay this promotion of plurality side by side also with some kind of segregation? We do not know. It is possible because once again, taking the cue from Ashin Das Gupta, who fascinatingly wrote in a small essay, not one of his typical academic essays, that Indians are known to have been living with different communities of different faiths, with different social structures, belongings, status, together as neighbors. But do Indians know their neighbors well? Like nowadays, as you call in the bank, know your customers, it is high time we know our neighbors. That would break down the kind of sort of the deliberate homogenization of Indian people, the diversity, and that's why I'm sort of uncomfortable, like B.D. Chattopadhyay, of always looking for centralized imperial political authorities. This is a fascination, and always looking for empire. I don't understand always where one can draw the line between a kingdom and an empire. And this historiographical fascination for empires is probably starting from late 19th and early 20th century, the heydays of maritime overseas European colonial empires. The Indic authors, many of them great scholars and pioneers in the field, that imperial formations were also possible in pre-colonial times. They were trying to posit that. But take, for example, did Ashok say that I am an emperor? The term Samrat, we use the term. He simply said that I am a Raja, but was aware that his territory was vast. Mahalakahi Vijitam. Obviously, Ashokan territory under the Mauryas, nearly pan-India, cannot be matched by a very powerful regional political entity of the early medieval times, like the Palas of Bengal, like the Gurjar Pratyaras in Western India and the Rashtrakutas. They are very powerful, but essentially regional. And there is nothing to be scary about. If you do not see, as in the early medieval period, a subcontinental paramount power, or even a North Indian, South or Deccanese or South Indian paramount powers, the multiplicity of powers should not create a kind of a panic among the historiographers. That is sometimes, and the always tendency is to see that if there is a far-flung empire, even if it's there, it must be, according to the historiography, must be centralized and unitary. That if it's a centralized empire, then law and order is perfectly maintained from the apex political center to every nook and corner of that realm. So if it is well administered, then it is conducive to economic efflorescence. If it is economic efflorescence, then it will lead to social peaceful stability, and ultimately it will be marked by cultural efflorescence. So always the key is to look for centralization. The regional characters are actually then sidelined. That I am not at all happy with. The flourishing of the regions must be given due recognition in history, particularly in, in the pre-modern times. And yes, there were empires, but empires do not always can claim the historiographical thrust that they have been doing for a very long time. That is the importance of the work of the recently passed away Herman Kulke, of the late lamented B.D. Chattopadhyay, and my very close friend B.P. Sahu of Delhi University, who departed at a very relatively young age. And they were the makers of the search for multiple foci of powers at the regional levels, sometimes supra-regional levels, and they also, that's why the beginning of the regional flavors in language, in culture, in religious expression. You do not see a Shiva is worshipped all over India, but you don't see a replication of the Cholo bronze Nataraja anywhere in India. That is a typical regional flavor. The Bengal Buddhist sculpture, you do not see the matching exactly that its character replicated in Western India. The monumental temple styles in three regions, North India, Nagara, Dravida in the Deccan, in the far south, and Vesara in the Karnataka area. They all speak of the regional characters, and interestingly, this is the early medieval India, is the beginning of many regional vernaculars. As I talked about the Malayalam, you have Tamil is a very, very ancient language, a classical language, but you also see in the land grants, the beginning, the Prashasti portion, the political information, the dynastic is in Sanskrit, but the operative part of the land grant is always in local vernacular, in Kannadese or in Telugu or in Tamil. This accommodation of the Sanskrit part as the sort of, I would say, the preliminary part of the the preamble of the record and the operative part, they are a combination of the two different sets of language. And unfortunately, the traditional historiography often talked about the influence of the overarching influence of Sanskrit. Yes, Sanskrit is a great language, but the regional variations of vernaculars can never be lost sight of, because that is brought out by the corporate grants. Why they would mention the details of the land grants in Tamil or in Kannadese or in Telugu? As I said, the well-known Charter of Security of Kakatiya Ganapati, the beginning portion, the preamble is in perfect Sanskrit, and then actual what commodities are to be taxed at what rate is in Telugu. So this is once again the plurality, the diversity.
Sir, if we could move to your critique of the integrative polity model, which heavily emphasizes upon the extension of the agrarian frontier, your objection has been that the so-called appropriation of autochthonous cults into the Brahmanical pantheon, one of the model's central fulcra, was deeply asymmetrical and therefore hardly conducive to genuine integration. Therefore, one witnesses, on the one hand, a continuous movement towards inclusion in the realm of political economy, while on the other, a perpetual trend towards exclusion in the ritual sphere. How do you look at the varna-jati institution at the conjunction of these two processes?
This is absolutely central to the land grant oriented society and economy. Uh, the, the case is most of the land grants were made in erstwhile uninhabited, unsettled areas, maybe uncultivated tracts, maybe marshy, maybe forest tracts. There are numerous examples. And there were such groups who are considered the autochthonous elements, like the Shavaras, like the Pulindas. You see the Pulindas figuring as early as the Ashokan inscriptions. Then, take for example, this is beginning from 450, 500 onward. This is a continuous process. In about Jabalpur area, the local rulers of Uchakalpas, 533, they were using Gupta era, but still perhaps paying allegiance to the Guptas, but Gupta Empire is also tottering at this time, 533. The local ruler, Shadvanatha, is patronizing a temple of Moni Nageshwari. Hardly a typical Sanskritic Brahmanical divinity. And there are references to a person of the Pulinda origin. And this is the typical Jabalpur area, which is still today you have a considerable forest, dense forest cover. And this area was known categorically as Ashtadasha Atavika Rajya. 18 forest chieftaincies were there. With the spread of monarchy, you don't see after 550 any such forest chieftaincies. The monarchical rule is now, dynastic monarchy is well established. And this is the area where from 9th century onwards, 9th, 10th century, you find the Kalachuris of Tripuri, Jabalpur area. And the Brahmanas are definitely given the prime position in the varna-jati system. You see gradually then the many such autochthonous groups, including the Chandalas and the Parayas, the Shavaras. The Shavaras, in the context of Odisha, one such early rulers called Kavarnava, about in the 8th century inscription, says that he is one of the very early predecessors of the dynasty, that he killed the Shavaraditya, the Shavara chieftains, and then assumed Samrajya Chinna, his ruling position. Similarly, in 880s, the 861 precisely, in Western India, a local Gurjara ruler, not a typical very powerful Gurjara, named Kokkuka. He's telling he has displaced and exterminated the terrible Abhiras. Abhiras are the typical cowherd community. And destabilized them, displaced them, and in their area brought up a very fine trading center. Now what happened? These persons will gradually be inducted within the varna-jati structure. The jati will be considered as what is called varna sankara. Mishra jati is the union between two unequal caste groups. This is nothing but a fictive statement. I'll state two cases. The Chandalas are seen as the worst example of the worst form of marriage combination, Pratilam, between the highest born of female, Brahmana woman, and the lowest born of male, that is the Kshudra. The offspring will be a Chandala, and uniformly sort of despised in all Shastric texts. What the Arthashastra says. The Arthashastra, laying down the typical process of expansion of agriculture by bringing new villages, Janapada, new villages, says that in the new village, at the outskirts, there will be Antapala, that is, those who look after the frontier area, the limit area. And there also will reside, please note the term, Chandala Bagurika Shabara Aranyacharas. Chandalas are not described here as the lowest and most abominable offspring of the most hated marriage combination. They are called Aranyacharas. This is the story when in the Brahmanical, I call it a fictive legal position. There is nothing at all substantial in the claim of the various matrimonial permutations, combinations, the formation of the jatis. These aboriginal groups, these autochthonous elements, were with the spread of the Brahminical settlements, obviously varna-jati system would creep in, and these persons will be kept even at the lowest possible margins, and then pointed out of their very low esteem birth out of these fictive notions of Varna Sankara. There, the cases, I would give another very clear epigraphic understanding, the largest known Cholo copper plate. 11th century, mid-11th century, wonderfully edited by Y. Subbarayalu, the Tiruvindalur copper. 83 copper plates have been attached together with a very heavy copper ring. It speaks of a very large number of brahmanas being brought to the core area of the Cholo authority from dispersed areas under the Cholo rule. That's okay. And obviously, the greatness of the Brahmana who are settled there, given lands, are given in details. At the end of the record is called a section of Vyavastha, meaning some arrangement. And there it categorically states, if the parayas, the toddy tappers, enter into this area, if they are not able to pay the taxes, if they are found during a thievery, they can be beaten, tortured, put to death. This is the asymmetry. And I call it, yes, if you use the word integrative polity, which B.D. Chattopadhyay, Herman Kulke and B.P. Sahu brought it as an alternative model to fragmentation of polity by Indian feudalism specialists and the segmented polity in South India by Barton Stein, if they tell that by this process, both these processes actually talk that political process was coming almost to a nothing. And if you constantly go on with the land grant economy from 500 to 1300, continuous parcelization of sovereignty, this is Sharmaji's star, then the state would wither away. Did it wither away? There are so many monarchical powers all over India, the spread of monarchical power is there. So if you think that the state is not disintegrating, and therefore you can bring the question of integration, but integration with the Brahmana-led varna-jati system, varnashrama system being the political, the ideology of the political power. Even the Buddhist Pala rulers considered that they were protectors of the varnashrama dharma. Then the varna-jati system hardly allows any semblance of equality in society. It's a sharply divisive, asymmetrical, and almost, I must say, inhuman provisions are there against the lower order. If this is the plank of the political ideology of all the monarchical houses, almost in pan-Indian scenario, with many of the divinities originally worshipped by this autochthonous group now taken over by the bhakti ideology of the rulers and also their preceptors. Can this be integrative? Because varna-jati system cannot integrate. It actually divides people in terms of ritual ranking and considers the lowest group, the avarnas, also the shudras. What is the term in Manu itself? Uno mana, like less than human beings. Like you say untis, untalis, lower than 40, lower than 30. So uno mana. They're not human beings, below human beings. Is it sort of, is this ideology capable of integration? On the other hand, we find many, and B.D. Chakravarti himself says a cult appropriation. Many of the divinities then enshrined in royal monumental temples originally were worshipped by these autochthonous non-Varna system groups, Avarna groups. These were appropriated within the bhakti ideology of three main strides: Vaishnavism, Shaivism, and Devi worship, Devi cult. This appropriation, to me, is neither a very innocent process nor a very innocuous process. If you say integrative, there is a very positive vibe in that. I don't see that positive vibe.
Professor, as we move towards the closing stages of our conversation, we would like to end on a slightly more reflective. You have mentioned how Tagore's ideas on the nation and its constituents have helped you to, on the one hand, transcend the barrier of the nation state, and on the other, orientate you towards the composite character of the subcontinent in your historical research. Oshin Dasgupta often spoke of certain dimensions of human experience that history could never access and how literature can sometimes fill these gaps. When we look at works like A Tale of Two Cities or Bani Boshu's Moityo Jado, they seem to capture something of the historical pulse in ways that conventional historiography often cannot. In that light, we were wondering whether this raises a broader methodological question, particularly when we think about the differences between working on early India as opposed to more modern periods. Do you think that the historian of early India, given the nature of their sources and silences, is perhaps more compelled to engage with such creative approaches than a historian of modern India? And if so, does that make it more justified or still premature to call for a dismantling of the traditional divide between history as fact and literature as fiction, allowing for a more holistic understanding of the human condition itself?
I'll answer your, this is a complex question of the nation state, which is now the almost world order. Everywhere you see the emergence of nation state. Nation state did not exist anywhere in the world prior to 16th century, actually from mid 17th century. The consolidation, particularly with the Treaty of Westphalia in European situation. Then the model of nation state is expanding through the European colonial expansion to other non-European societies. It has, on the other hand, this nationalism and the emergence of a national movement ultimately has immensely strengthened the fight against colonialism and actually the demise of colonial empires. So nationalism has a role, but to project nationalism in pre-colonial times, to tell that this is almost a nation is always there in Indian situation, and particularly the word Rashtra. As I pointed out, the term Rashtra never meant the word meaning of present day a state or a nation state. The Rashtra means a, that inhabited territory, and it's a revenue term. How the state can raise revenue from agrarian resources called Rashtra. Rashtra cannot, in that sense, make the sense of a state here as we are used to do. Okay. And to put that the understanding of nation, the sense of a nation was always there in Indian, no pre-modern situation, no country in anywhere in the world required a nation state in those days. Nation state is also a particular formation of a relatively recent times from 16th, mostly from 17th century. This is one. The other point is, if you talk about the nation state, and in terms of once and again, a homogenized communities, one or two homogenized communities, that will be a travesty of history. Because we do not see the word even Bharatiya in Sanskrit sources. There is a concept of a geographical notion of Bharata, Jambudvipa, or Hindustan. Please note the term is Hindustan, S-T-A-N, stan. Stan is a Persian word meaning a land. That's what Afghanistan, Pakistan, Uzbekistan. It has nothing to do with Stan. Nothing in that sense that Stan is a kind of a sacred area. No, the spelling is wrong. And the term Hindustan actually first figures in an inscription of the Sassanid ruler of 262 CE. It was popularized in Arabic and Persian literature from 10th century onwards. But the original term Hindustan has nothing to do with the entire subcontinent. It means the lower Indus Valley. Okay, that's a separate point. The other point is Tagore's, I followed Tagore's situation. Nationalism, what he saw in the case of aggressive nationalism, which combined with imperial expansion and therefore putting a very large area of what is generally called nowadays the third world, Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. These became the theater of European national fervor to colonize the non-European societies and then their struggle to dominate. I'll just refer to one interesting Bangla essay, very brief essay, soon after the First World War broke out. And obviously Tagore used to get the information only in trickles. In those days, where you get the information? He writes that this is not a world war at all. It is a European war. The essay is named Ladai er Mool, at the crux of the Ladai. He says this is not a world war. This is an European war. This is foisted on the entire world by the competitive grab for colonies in non-European areas. He said categorically that the England, Britain, and France led this competition for a very long time. Now Germany is ascending. It also demands a share of colonial enterprises. That is getting into the conflict among three premier European powers, and it affects the entire globe. He brings this question and what is acceptable as citizenship and the typical features of democratic rights of citizen, equality, and other legal provisions are only meant for the colonizers, not for the colony. And the aggressive nationalism which he hated and denounced repeatedly, even in the case of Japan. In 1937, his exchanges, angry exchanges of the very famous Japanese poet Noguchi, is in public domain. And this he was repeatedly critiquing. And I am against this aggressive, homogeneous sort of muscle oriented, muscular nationalism. I'm very much against it. I don't see this nationalism has any place in an ideal democratic society. A democratic society is based on the plurality. Varieties of social customs, varieties of faiths have the equal honor and provision in a proper democratic society. And therefore, the diversity leads to the equal recognition of the diversity. And that makes plurality as the very essence of nationalism. If you homogenize it, it completely defeats the purpose. And that is the muscular majoritarian democracy's terrible poison. And I draw my inspiration in these things from Tagore himself. Okay. And in I have always maintained that yes, as historians, we have to depend on documentation which can be checked, verified, proven, and then used as sources of history. Literature may not record historical actuality, but they emanate from historical experiences. And sometimes the literary creator can create and reveal some of the most important inner truths of human activities and proclivities, which no document can capture. And even literature, also literary texts, like all other sources of history, have their own perspective. Who is the author? Who is the patron? Who is the audience? And in what we call historical documentation, the historical sources is also something what we understand history as an academic discipline, which is, of course, coming from Europe. And then we are accustomed to it through a very long experience of colonization and colonial education. Take, for example, Mahabharata as a great epic. It has its deep historical attachment, not because if Kurukshetra was really fought, or if there was really Yudhishthira or Arjuna or anyone, but certain things bear on historical experience. Take, for example, when the recitation of the Mahabharata in Noimisha forest by Ugrasrava Sauti, who is a bard who has gathered the original tale by listening to it and then reciting it, but not exact repetition of what he had heard. There are new elements. And he says this story will be told by kavis, by poets, kavaya, not by historians, and says that it's itihas. So we use the term itihasa as an equivalent of history, what is a post-enlightenment intellectual discipline coming from the Occidental tradition. Itihasa is a vernacular translation of the word history, and itihasa what was understood by pre-modern writers or the storytellers. He says this is an itihasa, Ugrasrava Shroti, but he says this itihasa had been told, is being told, and will be told by kavis, by poets. Even Rajatarangini of Kala, whom many of the historians of present day would consider having the typical features of what is called the essential of modern historical outlook. He also tells that this is a kavya. So the, the kavya is itself carries elements of past experiences. How someone of the ancient times remembered their past. I'll give you one example. One of the finest of Sanskrit prose epic literature, literary creation, the earliest of the Charita work, deeds, is Harshacharita Bharagavatta, a classic Sanskrit prose writing. And we know he describes how Harsha came to ascend the throne. He was a younger son of his father, so normally he should not come to the throne, but his elder brother was, according to Bharagavatta, treacherously murdered by Shashanka, the ruler of Bengal, by inviting him in his palace and then surreptitiously killing him. He then gives some other prior parallels where rulers foolishly did not take proper caution when they are going, or they have failed to recognize the hostile attitudes of some of their trusted persons, and mentions this is exactly happened with the last Mauryan ruler Brihadrata, who was killed by his commander-in-chief Pushyamitra Sunga. This is recorded in a 7th century text which had happened in early 2nd century, a gap of 900 years. So there is a historical knowledge. And very interestingly, the original Sanskrit text is Bhargavata lambasts Pushyamitra Sunga, telling that he is an Anarya. This is a very significant statement. Anarya, that the term Arya, Anarya, even in a classical Sanskrit prose, it's a remarkable text, has no ethnic sense. Aryans, no, it's a completely wrong historical, it's a dangerously created term. Aryans as an ethnic groups. The term is after all, Pushyamitra Sunga is a Brahmana. How can you consider an Anarya? It's an ignoble or noble act. He was the trusted lieutenant of his master. He sort of staged a coup, killed his master, and became the ruler. That is considered a deceitful act, a breaking of the trust. That's why Anarya. But this tradition is there. It's within what may be called a historical atmosphere. He's aware of something of the remote past that is happening. Or take, for example, another classic Sanskrit work, like the Sanskrit drama, Vrichakatikam. Vrichakatikam, the hero is Charudatta. Who is he? In the very opening piece of the drama, he is introduced, Charudatta, as a Viprasartha. Whether there is a real Charudatta, I am not bothered. He is a representative. He is a Viprasartha. The term Vipra means a Brahmana, and Sartha is an abbreviation of Sartha, how a merchant. How a Brahmana takes to the profession of a merchant. Has he fallen in grace? No. He is the chosen hero of the drama. And Shudraka introduces that Charudatta was not himself an exceptional character of combining the profession of the merchant being a born in a Brahmana family. He is no exception. His father and grandfather were also Viprasarthas, and they lived in the large cities, merchants' quarters, Srishti Chattore, not in the Brahmana area. This is a categorical reflection on the historical experience in a literature. So literature definitely has bearing on historical situation, not always identifying that this had happened. Yes, Harshacharita, Vikramanka Devacharita, Vikramaditya the sixth of the Western Chalukya dynasty in early medieval Karnataka, Ramacharitam of the ruler Rampal of the Pala dynasty. These are all produced by the court poets. But all these have in their historical value, even with the element of the court panegyric, does not devalue their importance. They're very important source materials for understanding the reigns of these three rulers. But there is, I'm repeatedly telling whenever I look at literature or any other kinds of readings of the past, one has to look at not only the text but also the context. Context is absolutely essential. Harsha Charita, it speaks of the deeds of Harsha. As I said, Harsha was not actually to ascend the throne. He became the ruler of Thanishwara, his original territory in Haryana, but he is essentially known as the ruler of Kanauj. How he comes to occupy Kanauj? Kanauj was the seat of the Maukhari rulers, the last ruler Grovarman, who was killed in a battle. But there were successors of Grovarman at Kanauj. It's an usurpation of the throne of Kanauj by Harsha. So, in order to indicate that it was not it to legitimize this usurpation of power at Kanauj, the attempt by Manavatta as a court poet to legitimize the accession to the throne of Kanauj. Similarly, Rampal was also not the heir apparent. He was imprisoned by his elder brother, and so the court poet writes the elder brother Mohipala II was the sole responsibility of the almost falling, crumbling situation of the Pala rule and the Koibarta revolt, etc. coming up is an imbecile ruler. Thankfully, Rampala took the charge of the kingdom and rescued. In the case of Vikramaditya, he is also not the actual heir apparent. He had his elder brother. And in that, the poet categorically says, thankfully, by his own, the prowess of his own arm, Nijo Bhujabala, he uplifted the terrible gloom of his worthless elder brother and acquired power. This is also usurpation. So all these three charitas talk of a historical situation, but also legitimizes the usurpation of power. It has its own compulsions. On the other hand, you have non-royal characters of the charitas. One is, both are very well-known Jaina merchants. The Vastupala Mahatmya is a kind, the very well-known Jaina merchant who was also the administrator of the Cholukya rulers of Gujarat. He was a great patron of Jainism, so there is a hagiographical literature like a Charita, Vastupala Mahatmya, and also of an actual historical merchant called Jagadu about his far-flung mercantile activities and his patronage to Jaina cause led to the creation of Jagadu Charita. So these are coming up as pertaining to history, recorded history, but there are many, many, many literary scholarship, literary works that speak about the possible conditions. And the changes can be seen very clearly, once again from Mahabharata. Once during their exile into the forest, Yudhishthir was asked by some of the forest dwelling sages that how the Pandava brothers look at, see or view Draupadi, their Mahishi. Yudhishthir said that you note the word, Yang Sa Priya Bharya Panchali. She is our beloved wife, Panchali, not Patibrata, not one following the husband's unquestioned. Priya Bharya, beloved wife. She is as respected as a mother, and she is Madhava Pujaniya, and like an elder sister, she is respected. Jishteva Paripalya. Very interesting scenario. This is the bardic narrative. When the Mahabharata in the didactic sections and when it is taken over by Bhargava priesthood, the fascinating hero stories are now turned into a kind of a shastric book as called the Shata Shastri Sanghita, a manual of ideal life containing 100,000 verses. There, Draupadi is asked by Satyabhama how she is so happy with her 5 husbands. Her reply is, I do not eat more, decorate myself more, and rest, actually sleep more than my husbands. Never quarrel with my mother in law, and I'm always maneuverable like a machine. Yes. Natyashne, I do not eat more. Nati Shaya, I do not sleep more, that is, I do not rest more. Nati Bhushaya, I do not put more decorations and ornaments than my husband. No parivate shostrum, I never quarrel with my mother-in-law. Sarvada, always parijantrita, like a machine I am maneuvering. The same Draupadi, 2 different portrayals of 2 different times. Isn't it speaking of a historical change over time regarding the attitude towards women? One in a bardic heroic tale, the same Draupadi character as an ideal wife portrayed by the normatives and didactic section. This is how one reads literature. And Ashin Das Gupta's very famous statement on this is that literature can bring out certain mind's action and mind's revelation, which is beyond the ability of the historian. Historian is bound by his or her sources. Though in more recent times, Ranajit Guha, the founding father of subaltern studies, from perhaps early 2000, he was also getting away from subaltern studies and essentially looking at literature. He was telling it is the literature that would give us the actual understanding of human conditions, human way of life, human strength, their weaknesses, the multicolored aspects of human life actually in literature. Even contradictions, lots of contradictions. Without contradictions, and inconsistency. And that's why I once again very much follow Tagore, who was once asked, what was his greatest weakness? He says, inconsistency. What was his greatest strength? He said, inconsistency. That makes history of human beings much more humane. It is not watertight in straitjacket.
Professor, with that, we've come to the end of our time and to the end of this episode. We want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a privilege to have this conversation with you. We're so grateful that you took out time to answer our questions. Thank you so much, and I'm sure this will be a wonderful watch for our viewers. Thank you so much.
I'm very, very happy to be part of this interactive process. And I repeat, the questions you have framed are very thought provoking and speak of the deep readings of works and a sense of both sources and historiography. That is, I'm very happy with that. And please also convey my best wishes and congratulations to your friends, the History Society, and to the college as an institution that nurtures the spirit of inquiry. After all, we do not know the past, even perhaps in fraction, because only a limited traces of the past have remained with us in the form of different kinds of sources. And sources are incomplete. So, on the basis of the sources, it's impossible to say that this is complete history. Nobody can claim the final historical truth. And therefore, the possibilities of new explorations and progress, continuous progress of something already dead. All our witnesses are dead. The situations have been dead, but history is not dead. And I would end with, once again, as you brought the question of literature, I have two of my very favorite sentences in a well known American novel. William Faulkner's 1951 novel, Requiem for a Nun. It has two very simple sentences. The past is never dead. Stop. It is not even past. Stop. This is what may be called deceptively simple English prose.
So I'll just stop the recording.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. All my most sincere appreciation for this event. I'll be very happy to be with you in any kind of other platforms. It's a joy to talk to younger people. Our hopes, the future lie with you, not with us. Our days are already gone, actually. You are the future of any kind of really good quality activity, including academics, including any human wealth. Thank you very much.